So, in this video, we are going to be breaking down one of the biggest questions surrounding the conflict involving the United States and Iran. Is the fighting really over, or is this just the calm before another escalation? We'll also look at predictions made at the very beginning of the conflict, examine what turned out to be accurate, what didn't, and what it could all mean going forward. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let's get into it.
The Iran war is at an end, at least in theory. The US strikes this weekend, sparked by Iran's ongoing control of the Hormuz Strait, were a reminder that nothing is settled definitively. Both of my guests today made huge predictions about the outcomes and consequences of this war, one using real-world intelligence experience, the other a pedigree in modelling and game theory. I've invited them both back on to review how they did, and more importantly, ask them what happens next. So joining me now are Andrew Bustamante, the former CIA covert officer known as the Everyday Spy, and the game theorist and academic Professor Zhang. Welcome back to both of you. Professor Zhang, let me start with you. You made a lot of claims, really, towards the very start of this war, that you said that regime decapitation would fail, which is pretty much what's happened, that America would become bogged down in a drawn-out conflict. So far, pretty good. You also said that US would eventually have to put boots on the ground to achieve its goals. That hasn't happened, and we would hope it wouldn't. So when you look in totality at your gut feeling about the way this would play out, I mean, you're not far wrong. And I think the only reason the boots on the ground hasn't happened is because Donald Trump has realized this was an awful lot more difficult than he first imagined, and that actually, if he was to commit boots on the ground, it could turn into a complete disaster.
No, you're absolutely right. Boots on the ground would be a disaster, but I still believe that eventually the United States will be forced to use boots on the ground. In fact, you can argue that there's been a lot of preparation. You still have 60,000 American troops ready to go. They are staged and ready to go. And even though there's an MOU, they're still there. And you could also argue that the MOU is really just buying time because right now it's really hot in Iran. And so you have to wait for cooler weather before you can launch a ground invasion. And so I think we are in a waiting game right now, but eventually you will see boots on the ground.
So you think it will definitely happen?
I think the latest will be next March. It could be as early as December.
But why would Donald Trump take that gigantic risk, which is what it would be? I mean, doesn't all his behavior at the moment suggest that he just wants to get out of this?
I think the United States is still stuck in Iran right now because if the United States were to withdraw from Iran, then Iran would control the Middle East. The GCC would have to pay ransom, a huge reparation to Iran. And so they can no longer recycle US dollars back into the US economy, which feeds the AI bubble. And you could see a complete economic collapse if that were the case. So the Americans are just stuck where they are right now.
Andrew, welcome back to Uncensored to you as well. Sporting a new haircut, if I may be so bold as to censor on that immediately. Looks good.
I appreciate it, Piers. Trying to look like you, man.
Look, it just seemed to me from very early on in this war that I've referred to this a lot, but I'll do it one more time. The New York Times did a big deep dive quite early on about a meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House Situation Room, where the head of Mossad beamed in remotely, and they laid out a series of events to Donald Trump and all the top Trump administration people, which was started with the removal of the Ayatollah to kill him and some of his top people. And then there would be a chain of events that would be provoked by that. The IRGC would collapse from within, the people would rise up, and they'd all be too distracted to notice what was happening with the Strait of Hormuz. Well, the first bit happened to a degree, albeit the Ayatollah has been replaced by his even more radical son. But none of the rest of it happened at all. And in fact, far worse, I think, for Donald Trump and for Netanyahu, the Iranians quickly worked out that the control of the Strait of Hormuz could just hold the entire world over a barrel, quite literally, because it would control the flow of 20% of the world's energy. And then if they also fired off some missiles and rockets at their neighboring Gulf states and caused, economic mayhem there by doing that, then they really held a lot of the cards, to quote Donald Trump's favorite phrase in warfare. When you look at this, do you think it was just a case, not of Trump being told what to do, but that of him just buying into this playbook, which then just didn't materialize?
Yeah, I think there's a number of overlapping intelligence issues here, and at the core of it, I see it as an intelligence failure. First of all, the fact that the United States didn't have our own intelligence infrastructure to the point where we could see the holes in Israel's assessments and estimates, that's a major problem. It means that we went into Iran basically following Israel's guidance, following Israel's intelligence, following their targeting packages, instead of our own independent intelligence assessment. Whenever you're in a position like that, you're going in essentially blind, and you're going in kind of like the pit bull on the leash for somebody else. And I think that's what we saw happen very shortly after the promises that Israel made didn't really pan out. Now, where we are today is stuck in the same situation where we still don't have an intelligence network. We still don't have independent intelligence telling us what we can assess and what we can estimate, what we can predict inside Iran. And that's why we're still stuck in this quagmire. We have an MOU that doesn't give us any of the outcomes that we strategically promised the American people. And the MOU isn't working. There's no active cessation of attacks. They've just decreased, they've changed, but it's still happening.
Right, and Professor Zhang, the big goal in the end, which was explained after weeks and weeks of getting nowhere with the others, Donald Trump said, right, this is all about stopping the Iranians having a nuclear weapon. And yet they still got all their enriched uranium. I mean, I think the only way that can ever be got by America or Israel is with ground forces. So I think on that alone, that's clear. But the Iranians have also started talking openly now about the need to build a nuclear weapon, to have one. That actually what this has taught them, if people are wedded to the annihilation of all of their regime, then they need a nuclear weapon to defend themselves. And perversely, it could end up creating a situation where the Iranians actually want to develop something that maybe 3 months ago, 4 months ago, they liked to saber rattle about, but weren't actually going to do.
Right. So before the war, the Iranians had a religious fatwa banning the making and use of nuclear weapons. So the Iranians were committed not to building a nuclear weapon. With enriched uranium, Ted Posto, who is an MIT professor, he says that it'll take them exactly 6 weeks to build a nuclear weapon. So if the Iranians had the will, they could build a nuclear weapon. So if they were attacked with a nuclear weapon, then they would respond with at least 10 nuclear weapons. That's how much they can make with their enriched uranium. So it's really a quagmire for the United States. Now, I would say that this reporting that Iran wants to build a nuclear weapon, it's actually false. There is a religious fatwa in place, and it has to be overruled by the new Ayatollah, and that's a very long process. And quite honestly, the Iranians don't really need a nuclear weapon at this.
Now let's break down what we've just heard, because there are several major claims being made. First, one side argues that the United States may still be pulled into a larger conflict despite the current pause, while the other emphasizes that intelligence failures and strategic miscalculations have left Washington in a difficult position. The conversation also highlights the importance of the Strait of Hormuz and why control of that region continues to have enormous global economic implications. Another key point raised is the debate over Iran's nuclear ambitions. One guest argues that recent events could increase pressure on Iran to pursue nuclear weapons, while the other pushes back, pointing to Iran's stated religious prohibition and arguing that the situation is more complicated than many headlines suggest. These are competing interpretations of the same events, and it's important to recognize that they are opinions and predictions rather than established facts. Ultimately, the biggest takeaway is that although active fighting may have slowed, the broader geopolitical questions remain unresolved. Whether diplomacy holds, tensions rise again, or the situation evolves in an entirely different direction will depend on decisions made in the months ahead. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you believe this conflict is truly winding down? Or is this simply a temporary pause before another major escalation? If you enjoyed this breakdown, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next analysis. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.